Okay, back in the 1980s, when I was a Department of Defense research librarian with the Presidio military base of San Francisco, I was forced to work under protest with many documents that were above my security clearance. And one of these sets of documents, which was a huge set of footlockers that I was brought into the collating room to analyze, was a set of documents that had a security clearance that I had never seen before. It looked like something out of a comic book. It said, crypto cosmic top secret above was affixed to it. And I thought it was a joke, and my operations manager told me to get to work on collating those documents right away for the staff of the base commandant. And I told him, well, I shouldn't be allowed to work with these documents. I could literally wind up in jail for dealing with whatever the contents might be. And he said, Dietrich, you get to work on those documents right now, or I'm going to tell the MPs on the base that you tried to walk out with some of these files under your arm, and you will spend the rest of your life in jail. So, of course, under protest and against my will, I began to work with these documents, and they were basically the Roswell documents. The Roswell documents were an enormous series of documentation concerning, after the Second World War, how it was ended, and it's important to emphasize this. The battleship Missouri, on which the ceasefire was signed, was just that. This was a ceasefire. The Japanese-American War did not end until 1951, when the peace treaty was signed on the Presidio military base of San Francisco itself. This is something that can be confirmed. It's not really secret. But the reason for that was that it made it legal, or the reason I bring that up was it made it legal for Americans to keep Japanese prisoners of war in the United States. And at that time, one of the deals that Emperor Hirohito had made when he had forced the Americans into a ceasefire was he gave over the means of forcing that ceasefire to the Americans, which was his biological weapons dispersal system, which he used to force the Americans into stopping their invasion plans for Japan. This was a series of gondolas that had carried military gliders, military dirigibles that carried military gondolas, which were actually gliders, which would disconnect from the gondolas and disperse the biocidal weapons that Emperor Hirohito had himself developed as a marine biologist over the west coast of the United States and as deep inland as they could go. And the Americans wanted this dirigible technology to use for vertical takeoff and landing of their own bombers should their airfields be destroyed by Russian bombers in the event of an all-out nuclear war. So that is, in summary, the essence of that particular UFO experience. I'm not discrediting in any way, shape, or form actual ufological experiences. There was indeed a Maui Island experience in the northwest of the Pacific 2 weeks before the Roswell, Corona, Aztec, and San Augustine crashes took place. That strikes me as being quite a valid ufological experience. By that I mean extraterrestrial, potentially an alien intelligence. But with the Roswell incident, it was part of a series of crashes in the Southwest where these tests were going on, which the Japanese pilots of these gondolas took advantage of to basically kill themselves. They would take their flare guns and they would immolate the dirigibles that were above them, and the dirigible would burst into flames, Hindenburg style, and the gondolas themselves would shred along with the dirigibles and spread over many miles as the planes and the pilots were scattered. Now, because the Americans were trying to test if these could carry hot loads or nuclear weapons, they were fully loaded with nukes. That's why they were cordoned off, and the Americans needed to grab everything they could as quickly as possible. That's why the response was so quick, which is so atypical of UFO scenes, where the response is actually quite slow. That's, I don't know if we've reached the 3-minute limit yet, yeah, but in terms of going on about that, it's important to emphasize the fact that in terms of the Japanese and why they took advantage of that time to kill themselves was because the gondolas were so small that there wasn't a single American pilot alive who could fit into the military gondolas. They were simply meant for men who were short, even by Japanese standards, during the time of the war, so that more and more space could be donated to, at the time, vials of biocidal weapons. It's important to emphasize, most Americans are totally unaware of this, Emperor Hirohito himself was a marine biologist who had proven his professionalism to the world by discovering a new species of marine life before the war. These days, of course, with satellites, we discover thousands of new species every month. During his era, if you discovered a new species of life, you were automatically recognized as being preeminent in your field. So he spent all of his war, again, this is not a secret, this is pretty much something that's recognized at this point, he spent the war designing biocidal weapons at Harbin in Manchuria, which was never bombed by the United States. The United States effectively lost the bombardment campaign over Japan through the China theater because the Japanese essentially won the war on the Chinese front. Most Americans are totally unaware of the fact that 90% of the Japanese war machine, literally 9/10 of the Japanese army, was in China. Everything that America faced in the Pacific was literally less than 10% of the Japanese war machine. So the reason that was so valuable was because Emperor Hirohito figured if the American invasion were carried out, he could retreat to China, specifically Manchuria, and continue to fight the war from there. But he prevented that invasion from taking place at all by forcing the United States to sue for peace by threatening the biocidal weapons. In order to put this into perspective, throughout the war, the Japanese sent balloon bombs over the western United States that were mechanical. They would be a primitive version of today's drones. And these were clockwork mechanisms that were basically releasing dirigibles at various levels in the atmosphere. When they got to a certain point in the Pacific, that would force the balloons to go lower and lower, and these would release incendiary explosives in the Pacific Northwest that created huge firestorms. The American government hid this completely from the U.S. public because it impacted the U.S. strategically. Most of the Los Alamos energy, all of it, came from hydroelectric power, from dams in the Pacific Northwest. When these lines were destroyed by these Japanese balloon bombs, then Los Alamos and the Manhattan Project would lose all power, and the atomic bomb project was put back for month after month after month. So the Japanese had tremendous strategic impact on the ability of America to wage war with these firestorms. To prove what I am saying, there was a black American and African American smoke jumpers unit called the Triple Nickels, the 555, that was organized specifically to fight these firestorms. They were put under the Conservation Corps auspice, and many hundreds of them died, but none of them were given any benefits militarily or any medals after the war because they were not military. They were under the CCC. Also, any conscientious objectors, such as Amish, Mennonites who refused to serve